fields and show you how that can speed your data entry. We're also going to show how to update data from a source session. So if you're looking up, let's say, a quantity on hand and then issuing or receiving quantity, we'll show you how you can actually update that source quantity on hand with updated information. And then I'm going to go through a few real-world samples of how you would want to use the lookup functionality. Before we get started, I do want to mention that if you do have any questions throughout this webinar, feel free to type them into the question panel in the GoToMeeting console, and we'll address those questions at the end of the webinar. Any questions we don't get to, we'll go ahead and respond to those via email. All right. So I'm going to start by showing our TracerPlus desktop software. And I also do have a connected mobile device. So if I were to slide that over, you'll see I have a device here with an application already loaded. So the first thing I'm going to do is actually, I'm going to grab a project from our Solutions Center. It's going to be our inventory control and then our inventory issue and receive. These are free applications you can use as is, or you can modify to your liking. So what this is going to do is show you what's possible with lookups, and then I'm actually going to dive into how this was actually set up by creating something similar from scratch. So the object of this particular app is to basically maintain an inventory on hand of products based on location. And then we're actually going to receive and issue products to or from these locations. So our received product, we jump over to our form designer. You'll see what the actual form is going to look like. So we're basically going to be scanning a part number, select the location to receive to. That's going to actually look up a description as well as the quantity on hand. Then we're going to enter a quantity to receive, and once we submit, that's going to update our inventory list with basically adding to that quantity on hand for that particular location. We would do the same for the issued product. Instead of adding to the quantity on hand, it's actually going to go ahead and subtract that. And finally, our product list is where we would actually have our inventory product. So I'm going to just deploy this to our device. Okay, so that's going to launch on our device here. And we should see our 3 sessions: receive product, issue product, view product. So you'll see currently we don't have anything set up for it, or actually any data, I should say. If we were to go to the view product, we would see that we have 0 records. So if we were to actually go ahead and scan this now, I enter the product, you'll see that since there's no item in the list here, it's going to show you that the item's not found. So what we want to do is get some data over to our device so we can actually make these lookups work. So we can do that by using our TracerPlus Connect tool. I'm not going to dive too much into this as we do have webinars dedicated to Connect specifically. And you can actually access those on our training videos page. So I'm just going to create a quick project here, create a sync profile that's going to sync my inventory data from my sample list to the device. So let me slide my device out of the way. Let me just create that profile again and associate a desktop project to it. So this was our inventory issue and receive. Actually, our inventory manage. And I just want to create a process that's going to sync that data from my ODBC database to that inventory list. So this sample project I'm using actually has data built into it with our Connect sample database. So if I select our TracerPlus Connect sample, I could select our product list. And then if I select the destination of TracerPlus, we're going to sync that to our view product list. Then we're going to marry up our fields here. And lastly, choose how we want to sync that to the device. I'll go ahead and save this. Call this Lookup webinar. And if I jump over to the data viewer, you'll actually see our list of items here. You'll see we have 3 different stock rooms with some similar items in each stock room, along with a description and a quantity on hand. So now I'm going to go ahead and sync this over to the device. So if I were to jump back over to desktop and back over to our Connect settings here, we'll actually define how we want to sync this to the device. So I'm going to enter my IP address of my PC. That's going to be the PC that you have the Connect software running on. That basically tells the device where to look for the Connect install. Now I want to add a sync button. So maybe I'll add that to our product list form. So I can just go to our form designer, click on the button, and then place it on the form. We can name it sync. And then we just want to set a button action of do sync. And then we want to define our host and profile ID. So our host, if we jump back over to the Connect settings, you'll see that each host would have an ID. In this particular case, it's ID 1, so that's why we selected 1. So our next setting was the profile ID. So that's going to be your sync profile and Connect that you want to sync with this button. So if we jump back over to Configure and we look at our profile, you'll see that it has an ID of 1. If I were to add a second profile, that ID would be 2, and if we wanted to sync, just profile 2, we could specify that here in this profile ID setting. So now I'm just going to push this over to my device. And we slide that device back over. So once again, if we look at our view product, we have 0 records. So I'm going to jump into the view product session, and we're going to hit this sync button. So you'll see that that's actually going to reach out to our Connect software. Now we have 8 records. If I go back to the view data and view the product, we have those same 8 records that we have in our data viewer here. So now I'm going to go ahead and receive some products. So the first thing we do is scan our product number. I'll just key it in. So once we do that, you'll see that now that description is found because that item now exists and it's displayed in the description field. Now we can choose our receive to location. So let's say we want to receive to stockroom 1. Once we select that, now based on the item number plus the location, it's able to look up the quantity on hand based on those 2 pieces of information. Now we can enter a quantity to receive, let's say 25. So that should bring our total to 35. So if I hit save, and if I were to scan that part again and select that same location, our quantity on hand should now be 35. And as you can see, quantity on hand is 35. So let's say we want to receive this same item to stockroom 2. Currently it has 5, so let's say we receive 15 to make it a total of 20. So now if I were to actually go back to our view data and view product, here's our 35 for stockroom 1 in that particular item. And if we look at stockroom 2 for that same item, you'll see that we're at 20. So the same concept applies for the issue product. We're going to do the same thing. We scan an item, looks up our description. This time we choose what we're issuing it from. So if we do stockroom 1, we should see our 35. And let's say we want to issue 17. So that should leave us with a quantity of 18. And if we scan that part again, this time we issue from stockroom 2, which has a quantity of 20. We'll issue 8, which will leave us with 12. Now if I jump back over to view data and our product list, we should see that that's now been updated. Here's our stockroom 1. It's now at 18. Our stockroom 2 is now at 12. So that's the 30,000-foot view of what's possible with lookups and how it can really automate data entry for you. So now what I want to do is actually dive into how you would set that up. So I'm going to jump back to desktop here. And we're going to create a new project. So the first thing we want to do is name our project. So we'll call it Lookups Demo. A few settings here. One thing to note, actually, operating mode. Lookups are only supported in the professional mode. So if you have standard, you won't be able to do these lookups. You can also choose your OS platform here. So we can actually support Windows Mobile CE devices or Android-based devices from version 2.2 and up. So keep in mind, any form that I'm creating here, a session that I'm creating here today, I am deploying to a Windows Mobile device, but you could deploy that same application to an Android-based device. Okay, so we have our session 1 here. So what we want to do is add 2 more sessions to match what we had in the other one. So basically a session is a form with a data table behind it. Some sessions are actually used to enter data, like you saw here where I was doing the receive and issue product. And then some sessions are just used strictly for lookup purposes, like that view product list that I had. A lot of times that session may not even be visible to the user on the device. So you can actually hide item lists from view by unchecking this enable box up here. Once we deploy that to the device, I would only see session 1 and 2. All right, so we're going to name our sessions. So we'll basically name it. I guess we'll follow what we had just imported. So we'll call this receive. We'll call this issue. And we'll call this inventory. So the first thing I'll do is build our inventory lists. So the first thing we're going to have is our item number. The next is going to be its location. And we're going to want its description. And then quantity on hand. And we'll go ahead and remove any additional fields that aren't necessary. Now we'll jump over to our receive. Once again, we're going to scan our item number. That'll be our first field. We're going to select the receive to location. We're going to look up its description. We're going to get the quantity on hand. And then we want a receive quantity. Maybe we want a date time on this as well, just so we can track the actual transactions of our receives and issues. Okay, so as is, we can actually set this up to look up the information and receive the quantity, but one thing we still need to set up is a way to update that quantity on hand. So what we want to do is take the quantity on hand, add it to the received quantity, and then update our quantity on hand in the master. So what we're going to do for that is actually add an additional field. I'll call it update quantity. And that's going to be used to do that calculation and then update that inventory list. So our item number, that'll stay the same. That's a text field. Our receive to, we're going to set that as a drop-down. And then if we jump over to our drop-down tab, we can enter some drop-down items here. So we'll just say our stockroom 1, stockroom 2, and stockroom 3. So our description, this is going to be our first lookup field. So the way you define a lookup field is to jump over to the Lookup Options tab, and then you just want to enable the lookups. So the first thing you're going to set is a source session of where you're looking this data up from. So that in this case, we're looking it up from our inventory session, since that's going to house our data. So we're going to choose inventory. The next thing we want to do is define our lookup relationships, basically what's going to be compared to actually find that item and then look it up. So it's going to be our item number, because that's what we're basing our lookup off of. So our local field is going to be set to item number. Our remote field is also going to be set to item number. And then that'll also present a trigger field. That's going to be the field that triggers the actual lookup. So that's saying as soon as I scan something into the item number field or type something in and hit enter, it's going to trigger that lookup of the description field. Lastly, we want to set up our lookup results display. So this is the source field that we want to return or look up. So in this case, we're looking at the inventory based on item number, so we want to pull in that description field. So that's what's going to be our source field. You'll see some other options here that I'll talk about when we're doing the update quantity. So we have a return value if not found. So you saw when I first did the lookup when we didn't have any data, it returned a not found message. So this is a message that you can actually customize that will display in that field. We'll just say item not found. Then if we jump over to quantity on hand, we're going to do the same thing. We're on our lookup options tab. We're going to enable the lookup. We're looking in the inventory session. The only difference here is instead of just looking up a description, which is based on the item number, we want to look up the quantity on hand based on the item number plus the receive to location. So we're going to set up our relationship like we did before. We have our item number to the item number. Now we can actually add a second relationship to this lookup, which is going to be our receive to location and our location field in our remote session. And then you'll notice a radio button up here for an AND or relationship. So right now, the way it's set, it's not going to look that up unless the item number and the receive to match values in that inventory session. If I were to set that to OR, it would mean that I could enter data into either one of these fields and it could perform the lookup for us. So we defined our relationship, so we have our trigger field. I'm going to trigger this on our receive to selection. And then our source field is going to be set to what we want to look up, which is our quantity on hand. Since we chose the not found message for description, we don't really need to enter one here for the quantity. All right, our receive quantity, that's something you can either key in or we could use a number pad pop-up like you saw in our sample. If you want to do that, you just select the data type to number and then enable this use pop-up checkbox. Now we'll define a date field. We'll just set that data type as date time. Then we can choose a format. Maybe I just want a date, so I'll just choose our first option here. And we can also make that read-only. And lastly, we have our update quantity. So not only does this field have to be a lookup, but we have to set this to a calculated field type. That's going to allow us to do that addition of the quantity on hand to that received quantity. So our data type we want to set to number because we want it to do a mathematical calculation. This field is going to be hidden from view, so we want to uncheck that visible property. So we'll define our lookup similar to what we did our quantity on hand, where we're going to look up into the inventory session based on the item number and receive to, triggered on the receive to. Our source field will be our quantity on hand. So now this is where we would use that update source. This is going to allow us to, when we submit the record locally, it's going to take the value that's currently in this field and update that source session based on this lookup that's defined. So it's going to update that quantity on hand field. The append if not found, I'll actually get into that a little later when I show you a different example. That's allowing you to add a new record to the source session if a lookup wasn't found. But I'll show you a little bit more about that in a few. All right, so if we jump over to our calculated options, so what we want to do is a function of add. We want to add this quantity on hand to this received quantity. So we're going to choose our quantity on hand, and then choose our received quantity. And there's our calculation, quantity on hand plus received quantity. So now it's going to take the values of these two fields, and I'm in the seventh field. When we submit, it's going to update that to our source session. Next, we just want to define the flow of our app. So once we scan an item number, we want to jump to the receive to field. Once we select the receive to, we'll jump to the description, and then maybe we want to jump to the received quantity. And once we're at the received quantity, maybe we want to auto-submit that record, returning it to the item number field. So that'll control the flow of the actual application as the user is using it. Last thing we want to do is jump over to our form designer, and we'll just create a default. And we'll just style it up a little bit. I won't go too crazy because you saw what's possible with our sample app, how we can make it look presentable to a user. Maybe we'll drop the date down here. And maybe we'll change a background color here. And we'll change our text to a white color. And maybe we'll give the buttons a little different color here. So there's our finished session. If I were to save and deploy this, we should see our newly created application. If I were to go into receive, here's the session as it's designed in our form designer. You'll notice that lookup fields by default, as well as date time, will have a refresh button. We could actually remove that refresh button by jumping back to the form designer, selecting the field control, and then setting the hide refresh button to true. And since these are lookup fields, maybe you want these to be read-only as well so that a user can't modify those. But keep in mind if they were to modify it, since we don't have the update source option enabled for these, that's not going to post back to the source session. That would only be stored locally for that particular record. I'm just going to redeploy this. And there our fields are set as read-only now, and we also remove the refresh buttons from those two lookup fields. Since we do still have some of that data from our previous session, we'll go ahead and continue to use this. So if I were to scan our item number, let's say 124124, our fields actually may be out of order here. Let me see how our item list actually is. Yeah, I actually created our inventory list a little different from what our previous session was, so our data is a little out of sorts. So what we can do is actually move these fields around. So it should be location, item number, description, quantity. So I'll just flip that around, and I'll redeploy it. And if we view the data again, it should line up correctly. So we have our location, our item, description, quantity. So if we scan our item, you'll see that it looks up the description of women's polo. Once again, we'll select our stockroom. Stockroom 1, we currently have a quantity of 15. By clicking the receive quantity, there's our number pad pop-up. Let's receive 100. And that should auto-submit, returning us back to the item number fields. So maybe we want to do the same. Let's see if we have any in stockroom 2 or even stockroom 3. So stockroom 3, we have 10. Let's say we had 50. So that should bring us to a total of 60. If we go ahead and check our inventory. So here's our first one from stockroom 1. That's now 115, which we added 100 to 15. Then here's stockroom 3, which now has 60. So you'll see how quickly I set that up to replicate what our online sample had, and how easy it is to look up data from a source session as well as update that data with new information. I'm not going to go into the issue setup. It would basically be the same thing as receive, except instead of doing the addition for the update quantity here, we would set this to subtract. So I'm not really going to go into that because I have some other things I want to show you today. So we'll talk about that append if not found feature. That can be used in a variety of different ways. It could be just to, maybe in this case we would add an item based on the location if we didn't have it previously. As you saw, stockroom 2 didn't have item 124124. So in essence, we could actually add that if it wasn't found. So if we come back over to our quantity on hand here, we could do an append if not found. And if we were to push that out, actually if you want to add the description too, we're going to want to go ahead and update that as well. Actually, we'll just leave that off for now. I'll just show you how this would work. Actually, one thing I'm going to do, so let's say quantity on hand, if it wasn't returned, maybe we want to have a default value of 0. Now if I do the same scenario of item 124124 in stockroom 2, you'll see that since our not found message is 0, that's going to show us a 0. And if we were to add 50 to that and then submit, we should have another record added to our inventory session. I left that description field unchecked, but we could have actually checked that. But you'll see that it actually added a new item to our inventory. of stockroom 2 for item 124124 and for our quantity of 50. So that's how that append if not found feature could work in one scenario. You can actually also use that for a different type of scenario. Let's say if you were doing a work order and maybe you wanted to issue items to a work order, you wouldn't necessarily want to add all those items to the source session, as that would be your work order header. You can actually add items used to a different session, something called work order items. So that's what I'm going to set up now. So maybe we'll just add it to our existing session here, or project. I'll add 2 sessions. One will be work order, and our second one being work order items. So work order, maybe we want a date, a work order number. We want the customer. We'll list the problem. Maybe we'll take a picture. And maybe we'll have a notes field. Now we want to add items to a work order, so now we'll have an item number and maybe a quantity. Okay. So the object of this is we would have a work order. Once we submitted this, as we're submitting items, we wouldn't want to add multiple items to our work order session. We would want to add that to our work order items session. So the first thing we want to do is set an update option in our advanced settings. We'll do an update existing record based on the work order number. So when we submit in that local session, it'll just keep updating that main work order record so that we don't have multiple records for the particular work order. So we'll set our date field as a date time. We'll set it as a date. Work order number, we'll key that in, as well as customer. Maybe we select that from a drop-down. Keep in mind, this could be a lot more advanced with lookups and such. I just want to show the functionality of the append if not found being used in this particular scenario. We'll add a couple of customers to this list. So a problem, that could also be a drop-down. We'll add a few problems there. Picture, let's say you want to take a picture of the problem. We just set that to a field type of image. Notes, that'll just be freehand text. Okay, so item number, this is where we're going to, once we finish adding this information up top, we're going to jump over to a second tab that's going to just scan a bunch of items for this work order, and we want that to add to our work order items session. So in order to do that, we're going to head and configure our field 9. We'll call this add_items. So once again, this will be set as a calculated field. But we're actually going to use this as a concatenation instead of a numerical calculation. So we're going to leave that data type set to general. So first we'll define our lookup, which is going to be into work order items. And we're going to base this off of, actually it might be easier if I configure that work order items first. So maybe we want a date, a work order number that it's for, the item, and the quantity. And then we'll remove all the unnecessary fields. And if we jump back over to this, so we're going to update this based on our date, our work order number, and our item number. This is basically going to be a lookup that's supposed to fail because we want it to add to that database. So we're going to select our update source and append if not found. We're going to select our source field of quantity because that's what we're going to be adding to. And for our calculated options, we're just going to concatenate field 8 into this. So we'll select our quantity, add that. So that just means that this field is going to grab the data from field 8. And based on this lookup, once we submit that record, it's going to update that source session of work order items. Since we know it's going to fail, it's just going to keep adding to that list. So we're going to know, every item that was used for this work order. Maybe we'll just control the flow of the app. We don't want this to start on the date field. We'll start it on the work order number. Since we're going to be entering multiple items for a work order, we don't want to clear these fields. So work order number is going to go to customer. We don't want to clear that. Problem, we don't want to clear as well as picture and notes. Okay, so item number, we're going to want this to go to quantity, and then quantity is going to auto-submit going back to item number. So this is going to allow us to keep adding items to this work order without having to repeat entry of this top information. So if I jump over to our form designer, we build a default form. Like I said, maybe we want to have this add items on a different tab. So we'll go ahead and add a new tab to our form. We'll go ahead and cut and then paste this to our second page. Add items, I didn't check that as not visible, so I'll just remove that from our form since that's not necessary. And we'll just align some of our fields here. So what we want to do is have a button that's going to navigate us to our second page. Maybe we want to call this add items to work order. And that's going to be a go-to page button action. So we set the go-to page, and we basically just set it to the page we want to go to. Please note that these pages are zero-based, or the indexes are zero-based. So page 1 is actually 0, page 2 is actually 1. So that's the page I want to go to. And then maybe we want to have a back button in case we wanted to go back. So this is going to go back to page 0. And we'll just deploy this to our device. And if we look, you'll see that work order items, we don't have any data in there, as well as our work order. So we'll enter our work order number, let's say 123, select our customer, select our problem. Maybe we'll take a picture. And maybe we'll enter some notes here. We'll just say maybe replaced filters. Then if we click our Add Items to Work Order, we enter our item number, let's say 1111, quantity 5. That submits, returns us to the item number field, 222, say quantity of 2. You'll see even though we submitted 2 records, you'll notice that our record count is still at 1. That is based on the update setting in our advanced area here for the work order number. We're updating based on work order number. So we maintain the main record for the work order, and then our second session is going to hold our work order item. Maybe we'll enter one more item here, 7. And if we were to go back, we could actually do a clear all, and that would allow us to enter a new work order. I'm just going to jump back over to our work order items where we should have 3 new items. So there's our 3 work order items we scanned. So we have our date, our work order number, the item we used, as well as its quantity. So you'll see how that append if not found option can be used in different ways. One, to actually add something if it doesn't exist in the case of the stockroom quantity, or actually being used to add data or force data to add to a separate session based on something used. There's a lot of power with these lookup features. Fortunately, I don't have the time to actually get into all that. I know you have better things to do today, but I could go on for hours about this feature. It's a great feature. You can look up images, look up signatures, using it in a more advanced setting with an entry form data grid, whereas you're submitting items you can either add to a grid or remove from a grid. It's just such a powerful feature. And I wish I could cover more on it, but we do have some online samples. Maybe I'll point a few out that utilize some of these features. So we jump over to samples and asset tracking. If we look at our asset location audit, this is one of those sessions that would use a grid in combination with lookups and update source. So picture going into a room, selecting it, and it would display all the expected assets in this session, or in this location, I should say. So as you scan items in that room, they would get removed from that list as they're submitted. As it's basically, once you scan the asset, we're doing an update source marking a filter field from blank to a value of found, which then causes that filter to fail in the grid, removing it from the list. So that's how you would know if you were scanning assets in a room and you were finished, you'd know that you had missed an asset if there was still something in that grid. So that's one of the more advanced sessions. Let's see. There's another one in the route accounting section, the delivery of goods. Picture your Staples delivery guy is delivering furniture to you. He has a mobile device. He can select an order number. It shows the items that he should be delivering in this grid. As he scans the items, they get removed from this grid. So he'll know at the end if that grid's empty, that he scanned all the items that you're supposed to get. If there's still items in that grid, he knows that he should be looking on his truck for more items. So this would allow them to scan the items, remove from the grid, and they go to an acknowledge page where they would sign for that particular order. So that's another good example of how you may see lookups used with the grid control as well as the calculated lookups that I was showing you. Once again, I want to thank everyone for attending today's webinar. This will be recorded, so you'll see that on YouTube probably by the end of the day. But thanks again, and enjoy the rest of your day.